In 1614, the Polish adventuress Marina Mnishek uttered a phrase that would prove prophetic for the history of the Romanov dynasty. This terrible prediction hung over the dynasty for more than 300 years, and it was the family of Nicholas II who had to pay the final bloody debt to fate. More than 100 years have passed since the execution of the royal family. The sentence was carried out within minutes. After Commandant Yurovsky announced that all the prisoners would be executed, the first shot rang out a second later, ending the life of the last Russian emperor. Chaos followed. Gunfire erupted, and then the revolutionaries turned to their bayonets. Soon, it was all over. Even in this, historians see the tragic symbolism of the Romanovs' fate. The dynasty's story began with the coronation of Mikhail Feodorovich at the Ipatiev Monastery, and ended with the execution of the royal family in the basement of the Ipatiev House. And this is only one of the many mystical coincidences associated with the so-called Romanov curse. To understand why the legend of the evil fate that haunted this famous dynasty arose, we must go back to the early 17th century, to the time when the first member of the House of Romanov ascended the Russian throne. In 1612. Through the efforts of the popular uprising led by Minin and Pożarsky, Moscow was liberated from foreign occupation. The following year, after the expulsion of the Polish forces, it was decided to convene a Zemski Sobor, a national assembly, to determine Russia's future. The country needed a ruler capable of uniting its fragmented lands under one authority. But to whom could such a grave responsibility be entrusted? Among the main candidates were not only heirs of prominent Russian noble families, but also representatives of ruling dynasties from neighboring countries. However, the latter, including Marina Mnishek, the wife of both False Dmitrys, and her son Ivan, were quickly removed from consideration. Foreigners had already brought too many troubles upon Russia in the preceding years. The candidacy of Moscow's liberator, Dmitry Pożarsky, was not even considered. He descended from the Starodubsky princely line, which had fallen into disgrace during the time of the Oprichnina. Such a stain on his family's history could not be atoned for by any of his heroic deeds, even as a contender for the throne. Most members of the local nobility also had serious flaws in the eyes of the electors. Some were related to deposed rulers, while others had collaborated with the authorities of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. In short, by process of elimination, the 16-year-old Mikhail Feodorovich Romanov, a distant relative of Ivan the Terrible, was chosen. No, the electors did not see great potential in the young man, but his candidacy was convenient in many ways. Misha is young, not very clever, and he will be easy for us to handle, the cunning boyars concluded, casting their votes for the inexperienced Romanov. Moreover, Mikhail Feodorovich was unofficially regarded as a temporary figure. No one in his family was known for strong health. It was assumed that he would occupy the throne only until things settled down, after which power would pass to the next ruler. No one could have foreseen that this historic decision would mark the beginning of a 300-year reign of the new Romanov dynasty. The year after his coronation, Mikhail Feodorovich made the first serious political decision of his life. He ordered that Marina Mnishek, who had fled to Astrakhan with her 3-year-old son, fearing retribution, be brought back to Moscow. After a series of interrogations, the Polish adventuress was separated from her son, but was assured that nothing bad would happen to little Ivan. However, it soon became clear that Mikhail Feodorovich had no intention of keeping that promise. In July 1614, the child was brought to Bolotnaya Square, where a public execution was carried out. Muscovites remembered this event as one of the most brutal in history. The rope was too thick and would not tighten around the thin neck of the boy. The 3-year-old Ivan's suffering ended only after several agonizing hours. When Marina Mnishek was told what had happened, she went mad with grief. She could never forgive Mikhail Feodorovich for such a monstrous deed, and before taking her own life, Marina Mnishek cursed the entire Romanov family. According to legend, she said, "You began your reign with the death of an innocent child, and with the deaths of innocent children you shall end it." For a long time, the curse of the Polish criminal woman was not taken seriously, not even by members of the royal family themselves. The death of Mikhail Feodorovich was attributed to an unknown illness, and the deaths of nearly all the children of his heir, Alexei, were dismissed as unfortunate accidents. Only one of Alexei's sons, Pyotr Alexeyevich, lived to adulthood, and he was the first to wonder whether the misfortunes of the Romanov dynasty might have a deeper cause. In 1715, he met an elder who could read a person's fate by the lines on their hands. Peter held out his palms, and the chiromancer, barely touching them, suddenly exclaimed, "A little boy, hanged. His shadow follows you." Almost all of the Romanovs' descendants tasted the bitter fruit of this dark family karma. Many died in infancy, fell victim to treacherous plots, or were killed by assassins. Meanwhile, the legend of Marina Mnishek's mystical curse was carefully erased from historical records, chronicles, and even the Romanovs' personal letters. But the royal family never forgot it. Nicholas Alexandrovich, the man destined to become the last Russian emperor, first heard of the curse in his childhood from his father. Alexander III believed that his children must know the history of their lineage, no matter how tragic or terrifying it might be. The future bitter Russian emperor, Nicholas II, grew up as a sensitive and impressionable boy. Despite his Christian upbringing, he possessed a curious blend of deep religiosity and belief in mysticism. Aware of the family curse, he was inclined to see signs of fate everywhere, interpreting them as either good or bad omens. In 1891, the first serious incident occurred, one that would have a profound impact on the formation of his character. At the age of 23, Nicholas set out for Japan to study the political system of a potential ally and to establish diplomatic relations. On April 29th, while returning to Kyoto after visiting Lake Biwa, he had no idea that an attempt on his life was about to take place. That day, Nicholas narrowly escaped death. The attacker was immediately arrested and later brought before a Japanese court, which sentenced him to life at hard labor. The heir to the throne, prone to deep reflection, pondered the incident for a long time. How had he managed to escape death when it was just a hair's breadth away? Had he somehow deceived his fate? Or had someone from above intervened on his behalf? In the end, Nicholas Alexandrovich concluded that it was God himself who had come to his defense, who had not allowed him to die. This realization brought the heir a long-awaited sense of peace. From that moment on, he felt himself under the protection of the Almighty. But new upheavals were already on the horizon. In late October 1894, the doctors of Alexander III sorrowfully informed his relatives that the reigning emperor had only a few days left to live. Members of the royal family began arriving at the imperial residence in Crimea, where he was staying, to bid farewell to the dying sovereign. Among them was Grand Duke Nikolai Mikhailovich Romanov, a noted historian, author, and, incidentally, the uncle of Nicholas Alexandrovich. He was an extraordinary man who had spent many years in the archives, delving into the family secrets and legends of the Romanov house. For the young heir to the throne, his uncle inspired a complex mixture of respect and fear. It was there, in the Livadia Palace, at the doors of the dying emperor's bedroom, that Nicholas Alexandrovich had a conversation with the Grand Duke, a man who, as he believed, might hold the answers to all the questions that troubled him. As the famous historian later recalled, he realized even then that the heir to the throne deeply believed in prophecies and signs, while the prospect of real power genuinely frightened him. Two years later, the coronation of Nicholas II took place. By that time, he had already married a German princess who had converted to Orthodoxy and taken the name Alexandra Fyodorovna. The ceremony of the new emperor's anointing and coronation was truly magnificent. In celebration of the occasion, not only Muscovites but also people from surrounding areas filled the streets, drawn by rumors of generous gifts and the distribution of commemorative coins. By 5 o'clock in the morning, about 500,000 people had gathered on Kodinka Field near Petrovsky Park, and the crowd continued to grow by the hour. Suddenly, a rumor spread through the masses that there might not be enough gifts for everyone. Panic broke out, and people surged forward toward the stalls, crushing everything and everyone in their path. A horrific stampede began. 1,389 people were killed, and about 3,000 were seriously injured. Thus, the day of Nicholas II's ascension to the throne became forever associated in the public mind with the terrible tragedy on Kodinka Field. Popular rumor regarded it as an ill omen. A coronation over 1,000 corpses could hardly herald a happy reign. But this time, Nicholas Alexandrovich had no time for reflection. Power over a vast empire was now in his hands, and he was utterly unprepared for it. Nevertheless, the emperor never abandoned his desire to learn more about the mysterious curse of his family. In 1901, a small metal casket, secretly brought to St. Petersburg, came into his possession. It was known as the Ark of Abel the Prophet. Inside were prophecies about the future of the Russian Empire and the Romanov Dynasty, recorded at the end of the 18th century from the words of a peasant named Abel Vasiliev, who was regarded as a great seer. For example, he had predicted the death of Catherine the Great down to the very day. The empress merely laughed at the old man's words, but when his prophecy came true, public opinion about the strange peasant changed dramatically. Catherine's son, Paul Petrovich, ordered that the prophet be brought to him and spent long hours speaking with him. He recorded Abel's predictions and sealed them inside a casket, instructing that it be opened exactly 100 years after his death. And so, this mystical treasure eventually found its way into the hands of Nicholas II. On the night after receiving the casket, Nicholas Alexandrovich locked himself in his chambers and opened the long-awaited package from his ancestor. He carefully read all the papers inside the casket 3 times and then threw them into the fireplace, exactly as Paul Petrovich had instructed regarding the prophecies. According to court witnesses, by the next morning a noticeable change had come over the emperor. He appeared withdrawn, responded sluggishly to news, and spent most of his time in contemplative silence. Over the years, this state only deepened. Nicholas II often repeated that he feared nothing for himself until 1918, but he would pray for the salvation of the Russian Empire. Even after the execution of the royal family in the basement of the Ipatiev House, many of the last Russian emperor's close attendants remarked that he seemed to have known, in some way, the fate that had been decreed for him. Even the birth of the long-awaited heir in 1904 brought no relief to the reigning emperor. Doctors determined that the newborn suffered from hemophilia, a disorder affecting the blood's ability to clot, caused by a mutation in a gene on the X chromosome. Even a minor scratch could lead to severe and painful bleeding. In other words, the life of the Tsarevich was in constant danger. The news of the incurable illness of his only heir made Nicholas II fully convinced of the malevolent fate hanging over his family. After 1904, the imperial family began living a secluded life outside of St. Petersburg and became close to the folk healer Grigory Rasputin, around whom many dark rumors circulated among the populace. The emperor's popularity among ordinary citizens began to erode rapidly. It was only in 1913 that Nicholas II, who had almost lost faith in a bright future, found a glimmer of hope. For the grand celebrations marking the 300th anniversary of the Romanov dynasty, nearly all the members of the imperial family gathered in the capital. Lavish receptions and balls, military parades, and public festivities once again brought an air of celebration to an empire teetering on the brink of revolution. Despite the prophecies of numerous mystics and seers warning that the tricentennial of the dynasty would be its last, 1913 proved to be a relatively calm and happy year. Nicholas II met with his uncle, Grand Duke Nikolai Mikhailovich, at the Winter Palace. The emperor said to him, "I have been foretold death ever since I ascended the throne. Even my relatives, during the 20 years of my reign, spoke of the Romanovs' curse and of mystical numbers. But the curse has not come to pass. God protects Russia. The wise Grand Duke silently agreed with his nephew, aware of his melancholic and unstable temperament, yet in his heart he felt no peace. Grand Duke Nikolai Mikhailovich would recall this conversation 5 years later when he was informed of the execution of the imperial family, and then again in 1919 when he himself was led to execution in the Peter and Paul fortress. So what was it in reality? A hereditary curse or the tragedy of a single family? Likely, each of the fallen Romanovs would have had their own answer to this question.